Hi, good afternoon and welcome to the newsroom of TheJournal.ie for another live stream. We're here with Irish Water's Elizabeth Arnett. Welcome to the newsroom, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much.
So we asked for your questions about Irish Water last night. Tons of you have been in touch via email and via Twitter over the last 24 hours or so. If you still want to get in touch, there's still time to do it. You can email Dara@TheJournal.ie or you can find us on Twitter. We're pretty easy to find on the internet. If you found what you're looking at right now, you'll be able to find us on Twitter. So Elizabeth is here for the next 20 minutes, half an hour or so, to answer questions about Irish Water, readers' questions and anything you might throw our way. So Elizabeth, first things first, let's start with something in the news at the moment, meter installations in Dublin. We'd Lee Shoffley TD Brian Stanley of Sinn Féin, he's their environment spokesman. He said yesterday he learned that about half of the water meter installers working for GMC Sierra, which are the main contractors in Dublin, had been told there was no more work for them after Friday. What's going on there?
Well, firstly to say that the Irish Water Metering Programme is well ahead of schedule in terms of delivery. We have over 580,000 metres installed to date, so we're well ahead of the targets that were set for us. And last week alone we installed almost 9,500 metres. So the programme is motoring along. I don't think it's a surprise for people to learn that there are. I think most people know that there are some metering sites around the country have been targeted for protest, and protest in itself is absolutely fine. There's no issue in relation to that. But however, there have been incidents where there have been health and safety issues, and on occasion, from time to time, our contractors will suspend works in certain work sites, as much for the health and safety of the members of the public as for their own workers. And this has been an issue for the last number of months. In relation to the specifics for a contractor versus the employees that they have on the contract, that's really a matter for the contractor themselves. We have 4 major contracts appointed as part of the metering programme, and the obligations are on the contractor to deliver the metering programme in the way that we specified in the contract. So how they go about doing that is a matter for themselves. But as I understand it, a number of workers were put on protective notice, so no one has lost their job yet, but a number of workers have been put on protective notice in response to some areas where the workload or where the suspension of works in some areas means that that's an appropriate step for them to take.
So are we seeing a large-scale curtailment of the metering in Dublin?
No, not at all. I mean, I think the numbers speak for themselves. The programme, GMC Sierra, one aspect of the metering programme. As I said, there are a number of key contractors working all over the country, and we installed 9,500 metres. There's
58,000 metres installed in Dublin so far, I believe. That looks a bit low. I mean, these protests seem to be having a major effect.
No, actually, the percentage of metre installs in Dublin is actually reflective of the national average. We're just over halfway there in terms of the overall programme. We have about 115,000 metres to install in Dublin, so we would be beyond the halfway point in relation to that, which is in keeping with the programme all over the country. Now, as I say, from time to time we do, and our contractors do suspend works on certain sites for health and safety reasons. I'm certainly not saying that isn't happening, it is happening. But to suggest that that's a wide-scale curtailment of the programme simply just isn't the case.
So is it just a bit too hot in Dublin at the moment? Will other regions be having more work done as a result, and you come back to Dublin in, say, a year when Irish Water hopes that the protests will die down?
Well, we've divided the country up into different regions, so each of the regions work independently, if you like. So works are continuing apace in all of the regions. As I said, in certain work sites, and they're very specific work sites where you would suspend works temporarily, we might go back and install meters while we're still working in the area. So that has been ongoing for quite some time. To suggest that that's a wide-scale, demobilisation of the programme is simply not true. We would expect to be installing 9,500 metres last week was a very, very good week actually. Our monthly target, that's throughout the country. Okay. So our monthly target for installation is 27,000 a month. So that puts the last week's figure in context that it was a very, very good week. Look, we just have to keep managing the contract, and we certainly don't want to put anybody's health and safety at risk. If there is an issue in terms of types of behaviour on the street, we will suspend certain works for health and safety.
Okay, on the health and safety thing, Brian Stanley again from Sinn Féin saying that one of the reasons he was told of the dispute between Irish Water and GMC Sierra was that there was a dispute over who was liable to pay for security for workers. Is there a dispute on who is liable to pay for security?
Well, look, that's the detailed development or implementation of a contract, I certainly wouldn't be in a position to comment on any specifics in relation to that. We support our contractors in the implementation of the contract, as you would expect in the normal way. And all of the requirements that are in the contract, both on ourselves and on the contractor, we expect to be met in full. But managing the contract is ongoing across all of the contracts that we have in place. So I couldn't be drawn on the specifics in relation to that. I actually
maybe not for GMC Sierra specifically, but I suppose if our money is going towards Irish Water and going towards paying for this utility, is some of that being spent on security?
Well, the metering programme itself and the contract for the metering programme is designed to give us best value in terms of the cost of implementing the metering programme. And there certainly hasn't been a programme of its scale and nature ever attempted before. Working out the details as to what the requirements are and how you actually execute the contract happens between the two parties, as you would expect, in relation to the detail of contract. We certainly are not paying for security. We're certainly not in that space at all. How the contractors meet the requirements how the contractors meet the requirements of the contract is a matter for themselves, but we're engaging with them on all of these issues on an ongoing basis.
Okay, I'm losing my voice here, so I'm going to clear my throat.
Have some of the delicious water, but I believe it's bottled, so.
It is bottled.
Still tastes okay,
though. All right, now we're going to move on to this conservation grant. Now, you did touch on this pretty heavily in interviews at the start of this month, but this deadline that we were told about and warned about at the end of last year,
excuse me,
2nd of February deadline, what did it mean? It seemed to sail by, it doesn't really matter.
Right, so earlier, sort of in 2014, September 2014, we started a campaign to build a database of customer information. So the process that we're in at the moment is gathering information on all domestic properties connected to the public water mains, because there isn't a single database that says these are the houses connected to public services for both water and wastewater, and these are the houses that are not. So in us getting ready for billing customers for domestic services, we have to build this database. So the process that we're in at the moment is confirming details with households in relation to, first and foremost, the services that they receive. And there are two services that a household could receive from Irish Water. One is water in, drinking water in, and the other is we take your wastewater away. And for some houses, only one of those services would be connected. The property would be only connected to one or other of those services. That's the first thing we need to find out. Other properties may have no services at all. They might have their own well, their own septic tank.
So if you didn't hear from people by the 2nd of February, what does that mean for them?
So if we don't hear from people by the 2nd of February, we're preparing for the billing in April. And so we want to get as much information into the system as we possibly can, confirmed and right, so we send the right bill. If people haven't registered with us yet, there's still time to do that. In terms of us guaranteeing that all the details will be correct on the bill, we're obviously running out of time because bills will start being issued in April. If you haven't registered with us yet, you can ring us on 1890 448 448. It'll take less than 5 minutes to register your details. What that means is you are then eligible for the €100 conservation grant, and we have your details so that we can apply the right charge, because there are different tariff types. If you are a single adult house, the tariff is €160 for the year. If you're a 2 adult house or more, it's €260, or if your property is permanently unoccupied, it's €120.
So if you don't get those details in, there's a chance you might be hit with a higher rate for the moment.
Exactly, and the charge that you would be, we'd have to make an assumption that you have both services, and so the charge would be €260, and that may not be the right one for your property.
So is there a set deadline? The 2nd of February was there, but is there a set deadline between now and April?
No, there isn't. We'll take details at any time, and if the details are incorrect on your bill, you can ring us and we'll resolve it then. There will be a deadline though, and it'll be a cut-off for the conservation grant.
You're going to say drop dead deadline there,
but I'm not going to say that. Okay. There will be a cut-off for the conservation grant. So the process is.
Do we have a deadline for the conservation grant?
No, the deadline for the conservation grant is likely to be sometime in the summer, and that's a matter for government. So they've signalled that they will have a date in the summer whereby if you register with Irish Water, then the Department of Social Protection then will issue you with the conservation grant. If you haven't registered before then with Irish Water, then you won't be eligible for the grant. But that's a process that's being managed by government with the Department of Social Protection. From our point of view, we want to send the right bills to people. We don't want people getting bills that they shouldn't get.
Okay.
We don't want people getting bills that are too high. So we want the detail, and we want people to get the conservation grant. So the earlier we get the details, the easier it is for all of us in that respect.
Okay, now we've been asking for readers' questions. We've been getting tons of them in. you can still get them in. Dara at TheJournal.ie, or you can find us on Twitter. Elizabeth Arnett from Irish Water is here with us this afternoon. People have been asking about penalties they'll face if they don't pay. Will they face penalties by the end of the year? At what point does that start kicking in?
The penalties that would apply to the charges would only start kicking in if across 4 bills there has been no engagement with Irish Water. So in other words, a year. If you are on a tariff for a 2-adult household, which will be €260, there'll be an additional charge of €60. And if you are a single adult household and on €160, the charge is €30. So those additional charges will add on to the bill. If you engage with us and enter into a payment plan before the year, then those charges won't apply.
At what point do we start talking about things like debt collectors?
I think it's very early for us to be talking about that. We have to get the first bill actually out the door yet, so that's not going to happen until April. And then we have a year to go in terms of before we'll be adding additional charges. And then we'll have to see where we're at in relation to that. And I've been asked about this quite a lot, and I can understand why people are curious in relation to this. Our starting point is that there is a high compliance in terms of the payment of charges. The charge is, if you break it down, taking the conservation grant into account, it's a little over €3 or €1 a week, depending on the size of your household. And there are a range of payment methods for people. I suppose it's our job to make sure that it is as easy and convenient for people to engage with us, to register their details, to get their conservation grant and to pay their bill. And if we get to a stage in a year's time where we're adding charges onto the bill, then we'll see where we're at that point. But we've a long way to go before we actually get there.
Okay, so you're saying it's kind of a wait and see approach, but I mean, what are we waiting to see? I mean, if there's a huge minority of people who still aren't complying, then we'll send out debt collectors, or if it's only a small number, we won't bother. I mean, what are the metrics there?
I think the important thing for people who do pay and people who do comply is that the same rules apply for everybody. That it's not just some people will carry the cost of providing adequate water services to everyone. That it's everybody's responsibility.
So if a lot of people don't pay, everyone else's bills will go up. Because I mean, specifically, I'd imagine this is based on the logical assumption that water is worth a specific amount. So
well, the prices are fixed until 2018. That's the first thing. The second thing to say is that, you know, if you look at the response to the registration campaign, we have 1.223 households responded already, and almost 1 million of those are Irish Water customers. So that's we're delighted with that. Obviously, we'd like to have response from every household, but that's a very good response. And so it's up to us now to ensure that when people get the bill, it's as easy as possible to pay, and that the appropriate reminders are given, because this funding is necessary to improve water services for everyone.
Well, I'd imagine of that 1 million, a lot of people will be getting in touch. Will be people who maybe get their water from a private group scheme, or from a well.
No, the full number is 1.2 million. That's the full number. 80% of those people are on public services. So almost 1 million households are declaring themselves as customers. So we've had well over 1 million in terms of responses. So that's an important distinction to make. But actually, if you are on a well or a septic tank, I really would encourage people to contact us. We don't want to be sending you a bill, and we would like to see everybody in that category, you know, let us know that they have their own services, because we've no way of knowing that. And if you do get a bill and you shouldn't have got one, then you ring us straight away and you let us know at the time. But you're also eligible for the conservation grant, and I'm not sure that people are fully aware of that. It is for every household, not just customers of Irish Water. So if you've already paid to put in a well, or paid to put it in a septic tank, or you're paying a group water scheme, you're eligible for the €100 conservation grant.
So you can end up making money from this?
Well, you're eligible for the conservation grant, and that's a matter for yourself as to what you do with it. But but you have to have registered in order to get it.
Okay. In terms of people getting in touch and people registering, how many people have been sending back the registration packs with things like no contract, no consent, that message on it, and what's in Irish Water's view is the legal standing of that?
Well, if, as I said at the offset, the process that we're in at the moment is to confirm people's details. If the application pack made it to a household and it made it back, then that's a certain amount of details confirmed that there is somebody resident at that property. If we haven't been given details as to how many people are there, we have to apply the default charge of €260. In terms of the no contract, no consent, or sort of an objection, a slogan for want of a better term, less than 15,000 have come back in that respect, and less than 20,000 on top of that have come back unanswered. So around 35,000 of the 1.223 million responses would fall into that category. And, you know, in terms of the legal standing of it, the point to make here is that the Oireachtas passed legislation to make water charges the law of the land. It's not a discretionary charge, and it's not a contract that people are entering into because it has been passed through as legislation. So the process we're in is to confirm details because the bills will be coming in April. We'd like them to go to the right place and we'd like them to go for the right amount. But water charges have applied since the start of January, and we will start billing households in April. And it'll run, the bill run, if people don't get a bill in April, it'll run from April, May, and possibly even into June because it's a 1.52
So it could be June before people get their first bills?
It could be, yeah. I mean,
and then will they get their second bill a month after that?
No, they'd be billed then every quarter. So if you're on that point in the cycle, then you're at the end of the cycle again. So you'll always get your bill at the same point, 4 times a year, spread evenly out 4 times a year.
Okay. On to the landlords and tenants question.
Yes.
I'd say around a third of the questions got in overnight.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
We're over this. Now, just to give some context for viewers, that the Fintan McNamara of the Residential Landlords Association said at the start of the month that amongst his members still massive uncertainty around the area, that they weren't happy, that a large proportion of tenants weren't paying the charge and apparently weren't planning to pay the charge, and in his estimation a lot of them would, in his words, get away with it. He was calling for people to have their water cut off. What's happening in that whole area?
Well, first of all, there is no, and there was never any suggestion that we could cut water off, and that's absolutely right.
That's been established.
Yeah, and there was a provision whereby water flow could be restricted, and that's gone. In relation to the legislation says that the bill is, or the occupier is considered the resident unless proven otherwise. And what we've been doing over the last 5 months is contacting the occupier and giving them an opportunity to come forward and register themselves as part of the campaign. What we are now doing and what we now need to address is, and looking at the figures, we've had a really good response from owner-occupiers, but the response rate from tenants or non-owner occupiers would be much less than that, and it's less than 40%. So what we're now going to enter into a process is we're going to contact the landlords directly, and this is open to both landlords and tenants to ensure that the property is registered properly. But we're going to contact the landlords now, putting a call out to the landlords to say, come forward and talk to us, and we'll make sure that the resident, the occupier of your property, is the person who we engage with going forward.
So it's up to the landlords to come forward and give the name?
If they, the first thing I would do if I was a landlord is talk to my tenant and see, did your tenant register themselves? Because bearing in mind, it's the tenant that's eligible for the €100 conservation grant. So I would talk to the tenant first. If you have a concern that the tenant hasn't registered, you can come and talk to us, and we will make sure that it's the tenant that receives the bill, because the tenant is the person using the service, drawing down water and or wastewater, and that's the person that we want to ensure is taking the charge, not the landlord. And that I believe is the fairest situation. However, government did signal back in November that there would possibly be an additional piece of legislation with regard to the liability, whether it's left on the property or not, and they haven't made any decisions in relation to that. So as it stands, the landlord is liable unless an occupier comes into the space and says, it's me that's living here, so I'm the one who's supposed to get the bill. If the occupier hasn't come forward, then the landlord can come forward on their and give us the name, and we'll contact them.
Yeah, now the Minister did say in a parliamentary question last month that there was more legislation on the way in this. He hasn't given any date as to when we might expect that, and no one in government has either. So I suppose on that subject, no, you did mention in the interviews at the start of the month that there were new initiatives in this area coming in the next few weeks. Is it just more reach out to tenants?
Yes, exactly. It is. Yeah, it is to tenants and landlords equally, because we don't want the bill going to the wrong person. In other words, the landlord, and we certainly don't want the tenant to miss out on getting the €100 conservation grant. So, we'd like the properties to be registered with the occupier as the person receiving the bill.
This whole beat the cap thing that we heard about when the government introduced their revised, or their second or third revised plan for Irish water back in November. A lot of people didn't understand it. What's the story there in a nutshell?
Well, there's two types of bill. You get a metered or an unmetered bill, but all charges are capped, and that's very, very important. So you don't pay any more than €160 if you're a single adult property, and no more than €260 if you're a 2 adult or more property. If you're on a meter, if you have a meter outside your house and you are using less water than the cap, then you will automatically be charged less than 160 or less than 260 euros.
But the question is, if you don't have a meter, is there anything to stop you showering, washing your car, washing the cat to your heart's
Well, there's an
content?
incentive here, because if when you do get a meter and you are lower than the cap, then you'll be rebated the amount as if you had the meter in place.
But this could be in 3 or 4 years' time.
Well, the majority of this metering program will be concluded by the middle of 2016.
Yeah.
So we will have well over 1 million meters installed. Now, it's not universal. We do know we have more to do.
But it could be a good few years.
It could, yeah, it could. And I think until you have meters in place, you know, there's no way of knowing how much water people are using. And this is the real value of the metering program for us in terms of understanding consumption and also understanding leaks, both on the customer side and on the network side. So I think there was a bit of confusion that people thought maybe the meters aren't going to be used until 2018, and that's certainly not the case. From the outset, if you have a meter, you will get a metered bill. We'll show you how much water you're using. We'll show you how much that would cost. We'll show you where the cap either comes in above or below. And if you are below, you get charged a lower amount. If you're above, you're still capped at the amount. But actually, based on our research, about a third of the households would come in under the cap without any change to their behaviour. And with a 15% reduction in water usage, almost half of the households in Ireland are within striking distance of coming below the cap, which is quite incentivising for people because they can bring the charge below the 160 or the 260.
Okay, great. We have a couple of questions, a good few questions coming in this afternoon. On the landlord situation, I'm a landlord. When my tenants leave my property at the end of their lease, let me start reading this again. I'm a landlord. When my tenants leave my property at the end of their lease in the summer, how can I be sure I will not be responsible for the water charges incurred until the end of the tenancy? What's the process when a tenant leaves the property without registering or paying? So I suppose this is for people with current tenants.
Okay, so with current tenants, the first thing to do is ensure that the tenant is registered for the charge. So either the tenant does that, or you can contact us and say this is the person living in the property. When the tenant is due to leave the property, then we need to be notified so that we can issue a closing account, if you like. In more than for any other utility, if you're halfway through the billing period, it will be half the normal bill charge. And that we will pursue that with the person who is responsible for that debt. Now, it has been signalled that there perhaps will be a change to that situation. That's the legislation you referenced earlier on. But as to when that will happen and what that will be, I'm not in a position to be able to answer that, but as it stands at the moment, the debt would go with the tenant. Okay, great. And now just looking at the notes here, these are some questions from readers overnight. Blake Walsh, he had a few questions on the landlord-tenant thing as well. One of his questions, in short-term rentals, if there are 3 different tenants in a property over the course of a 12-month period, how is the bill split? I mean, that's a lot of paperwork for the landlord. Well, I think as any utility, it would be, if it's the gas bill or the electricity bill, it's no different. It's a utility bill. You nominate who's the person in the property that's going to be on the name on the bill, and that's the person who would claim the conservation grant. So it's no different to a gas or utility bill. So you put the same arrangement in place. All right.
On a different matter entirely, from Freddie Hoskin. I don't use Twitter, but would like to submit a question. My question is, could you please comment on Gardex and their work with Irish Water, specifically in the Stony Batter area? Now I have a look at this. Gardex are a security company based in Kildare. There was videos of them operating with recording equipment at the scene of water protests in the Stony Batter area. What's the situation with companies like that and Irish Water contractors?
Well, I think I don't think it'll be a surprise to anyone that there have been court cases, and I think you've certainly followed them. Yeah, there is tomorrow. And as part of that, evidence has to be presented, and as I understand it, contractors are using security firms to assist gathering evidence in relation to that, and that's simply all that it is. It's not that there's security provided on site per se. It is that there's additional resources on site gathering evidence for perhaps the purposes of prosecutions. And
so security firms, surveillance firms, whatever you want to call them, are coming in and they're filming protesters?
From time to time, they would be observing the works on the site. And they would be gathering evidence if that is required. If there is, if there's violence, or unfortunately there's been some very, very difficult incidents, particularly for the contractors. So it's appropriate that evidence is gathered if there's to be any kind of prosecution. So that's the purpose of that.
There was photos circulating of security workers filming an Irish Water protest, wearing Irish Water bibs with their faces mostly covered with scarves, hats, sunglasses, circulating on social media in the last couple of weeks.
Well, I think wearing an Irish Water bib and being somebody from Irish Water, I would suggest, are not the same thing.
But I mean, you couldn't say definitively that an Irish Water contractor wouldn't be hiring someone working for a security firm.
Well, it's
who's dressed in that manner.
Certainly not something that would be acceptable for us, but I think equally you'd have to accept that wearing an Irish Water bib does not make you somebody from Irish Water.
Okay, we'll leave that one there. On the subject of unfinished housing estates,
yes.
This is from a person in County Kildare. They say their estate is finished, it's 90% occupied. They phoned the council last year, and they basically, they're not sure who was responsible for fixing the leak in the estate. They got a response from Irish Water. It says they've no objection in principle to taking in charge piped infrastructure directly connected to our networks, subject to this being in a reasonable structural condition, serviceable, and full constructed records being made available to us. So he's kind of in limbo there between the housing estate being finished and Irish Water taking responsibility for its supply.
There's quite a number of these housing estates around the country, and so they're private housing estates. The infrastructure was put in by private developers. And as your statements from us says there, that in principle we will take it as part of the public network if it's in a reasonable state. We won't or can't take it in as part of the public network if it's not, because then investment would have to go into that, and it is, after all, something that has been put in place by a private developer. So the process that we have in place is that if the infrastructure, if on inspection the infrastructure doesn't require that we would go in and spend money on it, then we can take it in charge. If there is an issue in that it's fallen into disrepair, or hasn't been completed properly, or hasn't been constructed properly, well then it's not as straightforward. And there are quite a number of private housing estates around the country, and water supply is one thing. It's particularly difficult when there's wastewater, when there would be sort of a private wastewater treatment plant, and it's surprising how many of them there are. And up until now they would have been, separate private entities, and there is a requirement now to look at each and every one of them and see what stage can we bring them in on top of the public network, because if we have to take them in and if we have to invest in them, it's investment that doesn't go elsewhere, so we have to take it on a case by case basis.
Okay, let's just check in. Was that 20 or 25 minutes? 25 minutes. I'm losing track of time. Okay, great. Question from Quiva. Irish Water recently informed me over the phone that there were no plans in the foreseeable future to install water meters in apartments, and as a result apartment owners would be charged a standard fee. Charges should be based on usage, not by guesswork. How is this approach equitable? How is it fair? Well,
Quiva, I think you're right. I think the introduction of meters is the most positive thing that we can do. And as part of the metering programme, we've conducted a pilot study to look at the technical issues around metering apartments. And what we found is that more modern apartment blocks that are built within the last 10 to 15 years have a very high probability that we can meter them, because there's a single supply into each apartment. The older apartment blocks have maybe 3 or 4 different supply points in, and you couldn't put 3 or 4 different meters in onto a property. So as part of an expansion of the metering programme, we will look to see, we reckon that we can probably do about 50,000 apartments in addition to the metering programme that we have, and we'll certainly look to include that as part of the scope of the metering programme, because I think Quiva is right. I think metered usage is the best way to go.
Okay, a question here from Steve. I wanted to know what the situation is for someone who's never received a pack nor a letter, hasn't registered, and is still connected to the water or the mains. Just get in touch, I imagine.
Yes, just get in touch, Steve, so we can have your details. 1890 448 448.
Okay, now we're just going to wrap up in a second, but I just want to ask you a question about your Chief Executive, John Tierney. Now, in October, November last year, we were all told we'd be hearing a lot more from him. I know he was doing interviews at the start of the month, but maybe we haven't heard from him as much as we thought we might. I just know we didn't ask for him as part of this interview.
Yeah,
we
I was
asked
just
for you.
about to say that.
It didn't occur to me to ask for him because I didn't think we'd get him. But where is John Tierney? Why isn't he out doing events like this and talking to the press more?
John Tierney is running the business. It's my job, and it's my pleasure to come out and talk to you. So that's the way we divvy up the work, I suppose. I think.
Did you have to have a chat with him last October, November and decide on a different communication strategy after he had his talking to from the Minister?
No, not at all. I mean, I think just in general, we've certainly have relooked at and will continue to relook at all aspects of communication, but it's my job and my honour, pleasure, privilege to come out and do most of the sort of, particularly around the customer issues, to ensure that we're getting our information out and we're answering the questions that people have. So I'm sorry to disappoint you that it was me and not my boss.
Fair enough. Okay, listen, we'll leave it there. That's all we've time for. We'll let Elizabeth go. Thanks for watching this afternoon. We'll have the full video up and we'll have a report on it later in this afternoon. You can keep tweeting us at TheJournal.ie and the emails. If you're reading this, you can see the email address there. Thanks very much.